The story begins the narrative of its fascinating and mesmerizing journey. The description unfolds around a bare and lifeless field full of scattered cold weapons and bloody bodies. The space has taken on gray hues from the extinguished fires that left behind only small sparks in the sky. According to the narrator, everyone eventually died. The readers saw someone's right hand hidden in a black mitten. It was holding a mysterious red object with a small chip on it. Apparently, something bad happened to the owner of the limb, because the hand was lying next to the debris of stones with large drops of red paint. And in the next episode, the story introduced viewers to a character who stared silently at a jewel that had suddenly disappeared, leaving behind only a red magical tail that swept upward. The man had long black hair, which even through the yellow headband on his forehead fell over his pale face. His body lay breathlessly on the cold ground, from which black smoke emanated. The stranger mumbled in a low voice that even he, the one everyone called the strongest warrior, was about to die. The boy turned his head and cast his lifeless eyes upward. The readers had a chance to get a closer look at his facial features. He had a sharp but neat nose, straight bushy eyebrows, and wide eyes whose light was still like a dark orange. In his opinion, the narrator was not really up to the rank of the strongest, and he only realized it now. He was lying in a small depression that had been made due to pressure from a fall or someone's blow. Around him were a great number of corpses of various monsters, with large tentacles, sharp spikes and claws, hooves or tails, except that all of them, as well as the mysterious character, still in contact with the ground, were hidden by black smoke and burning sparks from the remnants of the flame. However, apparently, such a reality did not suit the protagonist, because he, gathering all the remaining strength, squeezed a piece of earth, leaving a trembling gesture after himself. Readers could see some longing and even resistance in this action. This man was wondering. He was interested in the reason that was connected with the goo and obelisk. And in the next episode, the character stood up slightly, leaning on both hands. He lowered his head, making it impossible for the story to see his facial expressions. His chest, hidden by the black suit, was billowing with black smoke, and his hands were trembling due to his devastated strength. Moreover, the place he had been lying on recently was covered in red stains. As it turned out, the guy wanted to know why the demons of the 8th rank also appeared at the obelisk. Before the eyes of the readers appeared a huge silhouette. This monster, several tens of meters tall, appeared as if from dust or a gray cloud. Its figure was clearly decorated with bony limbs and unusual mounts on its head, which resembled horns from below. The protagonist, who had been watching this creature from the ground filled with the bodies of other people, followed the creature's actions. According to his thoughts, mankind had no idea about the power of demons. Moreover, he blamed it on himself. The guy opened his mouth in a silent scream and started coughing up blood. His face was completely covered with abrasions and bruises of various sizes, and a tense muscle could even be seen on his neck. After a short period of time, readers learned that the reason was that the man had betrayed his title of strongest. Suddenly, someone's yellow eyes began to intently follow something. Their pupils were also unusual. They had the appearance of 2 holes, which made the iris look like a button. Her snow-white hair fell over her face, hidden by a black shadow, but it did not prevent the audience from seeing the same color neat straight eyebrows and long eyelashes. There was just one thing that was unfamiliar: red horns, which matched the ominous yellow gaze that gave its owner a predatory look. In the next episode, the story again told of the protagonist, whose face could now be seen more closely. He squeezed his left eye in pain. Apparently the organ was wounded, because the skin around it was in bloody drops. But he still looked up at the monster, who, in his opinion, was up to something. Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of him. This creature flew in his direction, raising after itself huge clouds of smoke and dust, which made the man even close his eyes and clench his jaw. As it turned out, the story introduced readers to a red-skinned demon with white long hair. As it descended towards the protagonist, bright sparks appeared around them, apparently remnants from the fire, which scattered and ignited with renewed vigor from the powerful sweep of its wings. The mysterious character, whose face was hidden by shadows, extended his red-clawed paw. His appearance was epic, blonde hair developing in the wind that moved flaming sparks, powerful wings standing out clearly against a lean figure with sharp, straight horns. The protagonist, closing his eyes gradually, explained to the readers that he had killed many of them, so he had one audacious thought in his mind. He made the assumption that the demons wanted to destroy him. The gap grew smaller, and the last thing the man saw was a bright yellow eye peering out from the approaching palm. Darkness followed. In the opinion of the protagonist, this was what death looked like, except that after a short period of time, a small flicker of light followed. The guy wondered, trying to make sure he wasn't imagining it. Then that fireball began to glow even brighter, blinding to some extent. Sun bunnies played around it, which were presented in rainbow colors. Its glare seemed to spread across the darkness. And in the next instant, a flash followed, emitting a strong orange light. In the new episode, the story tells readers how someone gave an order in a demanding tone of voice to make a line. The boys, dressed and chewing exactly the same, quickly formed a line. However, the audience's attention was quickly drawn to someone's bright yellow eyes with a white pupil that stood out strongly against the black bangs falling across his forehead. Except, as it might have seemed, it was a wary look. Though, thanks to the changed picture, it became clear that it was surprise. The protagonist was trying to come to his senses. It could be seen by his wide-open eyes and mouth, which did not make a sound. He had bright yellow eyes, a sharp nose, a neat chin, and a black mole under his left eye. He was wearing a black tight t-shirt and green baggy pants. He put both hands behind his back and looked somewhere in front of him, standing on the gray tile floor. As it turned out, the same action was performed by a couple dozen other characters. The main character began to shake his head in different directions, simultaneously wondering, according to which he wanted to know where he was, except that for some reason the guy was sure that he was dead. Readers determined that the man was in a mysterious place that had tall gray mechanical doors and walls lined with the same gray tile as the floor. It looked like high technology that allowed for good protection, probably from escape or attack. The protagonist looked at his right hand, causing his facial expression to take on a puzzled look. The boy was still in the clouds. Based on one of his new thoughts, it didn't look like a dream. Moreover, to him everything that was happening seemed realistic enough, except that he was still wondering what had happened. Why the guy started to examine himself, touching his ears, chin, forehead. As he suddenly screamed at the top of his voice, it wasn't even his face. The main character grabbed his head with both hands and toppled it backwards. Apparently, he was upset and even angered as he now no longer had the manly handsome face and pumped-up body. The man looked up, still holding his head and keeping his mouth open. He wondered where he had gotten to. As it might have seemed, his silent scream provoked the story to show readers where the protagonist did end up, reducing the picture first to the size of his formation of 4 ranks, then to the building they were in, and then to a town called Halotsi. Suddenly some blonde character with an angry expression started his monologue. He had disheveled hair and a beard. This man was dressed differently, a black loose suit with sleeves with iron rivets, and on his chest was a kind of red button. He put both hands back and asked a question to the heroes standing across from him. The character wanted to make sure if those knew what it meant to pass the warrior test, or what it meant to be a warrior at all. In his opinion, they were the complete embodiment of protection and hope. Thanks to the next episode, readers could pick up for themselves that the character was middle-aged, for he had distinct wrinkles on his face, which were clearly emphasized by his yellow eyes and bushy eyebrows. As it became known, it was the 3rd captain of Halotsi, Jai Yeatang. He narrated that one day, in 3069, 6 huge obelisks of Guan fell from the sky. They looked like a triangular red structure several meters high. And from that day on, the world came to an end. From the obelisks came the powwows, which they called demons. The monsters were of many kinds, huge blue lizards, horned and fanged creatures with hooves. And mankind, after a fierce and almost led them to extinction battle, they eventually developed a way to fight the demons. The story reveals to readers a picture of 3 doctors examining a blue creature, looking at its skin and internal organs as it lay unconscious. This was called the cross-hatching technique. As it turned out, the technique utilized a nucleus extracted from the demon's body that resembled a red glass pane. It allowed people to undergo crossbreeding and temporarily take possession of power comparable to that of monsters. After a short period of time, readers learned that 60 years ago, it was the greatest and strongest warrior of mankind, An, who appeared with long black hair and a bandage on his forehead that slightly emphasized his yellow eyes, which were burning with anger and hatred. There was a dark energy beating around this character. This warrior was revered by everyone as if he was a king, and he led all the other soldiers. The story described how An was followed by the same warriors with demonic cores on their chests. They were men and women who fought for him. All were supporting him in his attack against the strongest wave of demons. The offensive went on for weeks. Even the sky turned black. However, in the end, the warriors repelled the onslaught of demons, and those that remained were very weak. The almost extinguished flames fluttered in the wind in the form of small sparks that were dropped on their bodies. Thus the human race had a 60-year lull. The last words roused the protagonist, causing his bright yellow eyes to round up to unthinkable sizes. He was surprised by the retort, which meant that he had been transported 60 years into the future. Jai Yaetang lowered his head and said with a sad expression on his face that at the same time, they had lost a great number of great and brave warriors forever, all the way back to Anna, who was once called the strongest warrior of mankind. Moreover, it was rumored that he had fallen in a battle with several demons of the highest, 7th rank. This great battle between humans and demons showed that humanity would stand to the death and would definitely see a new dawn. And so it became known as the Battle of the Dawn. At this very moment, the protagonist was horrified for the simple and obvious reason that the highest rank of demons was not the 7th, but the 8th. Though not quite, he was beginning to realize that the human race was still unaware of the monster's true power until now. His musings were interrupted by Jai Yaetang, who exclaimed that if those great warriors were not there, they would not be there now. Moreover, they would not be able to see their familiar home. This was what their desire to protect people and give hope meant. The man waved his right hand to the side, attracting the attention of everyone present. And when he asked them a question, according to which the character wanted to make sure if his listeners understood him, they gave him a positive answer with glee, except that someone among the crowd gave an unabashed negative one, which abruptly made Jai Yaetang turn in that direction. As it became known after a short period of time, it was about the main character, who was muttering something to himself under his nose about the rank of demons. In his direction began to move a man with disheveled hair, but readers could not see his facial expression. When he got as close as possible, he made the assumption, addressing the guy, that he didn't fully understand what it meant to be a warrior. This caused the protagonist to raise his yellow eyes, which were clearly emphasized against his skin that was dark from the shadows. Jai Yaetang gave the order to call out his name. An intimidating aura condensed around him, which took on the appearance of white smoke. The guy hesitated slightly, and the reason was because he didn't know if he needed to reveal that he was. Moreover, the boy did not believe that anyone could believe that he was the great warrior who had traveled here 60 years in the future, on the verge between life and death. However, his thoughts were interrupted by Jai Yaetang, who said out loud that it was unacceptable to just abuse a special name like that. After all, who would have thought that he would be the namesake of the warrior Anna? As it turned out, it was written on a white tableau embroidered on a black t-shirt, which the next moment the protagonist looked at. Except that the man still couldn't accept it, for the guy wasn't even wearing warrior clothes. Jai Yaetang placed a shaking hand on his shoulder and gave him a warning not to allow himself to desecrate such a great name. And then he pressed down on him, causing the protagonist to topple over his back, because for a man to do that was an outrage. On mentally summarized that he was still in a weak body that didn't even allow him to dodge such an attack. He just had a name like his real name. The main character's body flew towards the tall guy. The push was so strong that a small stream of wind rose around them. However, Jai Yaetang had already turned his back. He looked over his left shoulder and mumbled that the man would watch him more closely during the next warrior trial, and at this time sat in a cold sweat, lowering his head. The blonde decided to make sure everyone had heard him, and when he heard an affirmative answer, he gave them the order to head to the test venue. Jai Yaetang's figure walked into the brightly colored room, causing a shadow to remain on his back. The physical test was beginning. Chapter 2. The story continues its rapid development. This time it begins its description with the main character lying on the cold floor, supported by the hands of another man. This character had swarthy skin and brown hair. He asked Anna, trying to make sure he was okay, to which the guy in turn gave the answer that he was still alive. However, he continued to keep his eyes closed. The stranger was surprised that his name was actually In. In his opinion, it was a very unusual name. He introduced himself. The readers now knew that his name was Lan Sumno, and he was apparently excited to meet the protagonist. His eyes were the same color as his hair. His face was adorned with a scar on his right bushy eyebrow and a straight nose. He was a cadet. As suddenly someone in the crowd objected, as only In dared to take that name. A girl with long blonde hair and bright blue eyes looked at the character and called him a silly boy, because she was interested in the question, according to which the guy really thought that since they had the same name, he could become as strong. The character's name was Sidu Liu. In the next episode, she defiantly flipped her hair and started to distance herself from the protagonist and called him naive. On gritted his teeth and grudgingly wondered why this girl was acting so arrogant, since she basically didn't care what his name was. He then asked Lan Zuno a question that was literally frozen by her, asking if he knew her. As it turned out, she was probably the most promising cadet in their group. Sidu Liu was also called the Princess Nesmayana. Moreover, the most famous martial arts clan in Helozi was the Sidu Lord clan. The protagonist tensed his eyebrows, staring somewhere upwards. He pondered that for some unknown reason, this surname seemed familiar to him. Lanzuno helped him up by grasping his right hand. He, in turn, thanked him. Suddenly, a bright glow appeared at their backs, which alerted both characters. As it turned out, it was a flash from a camera held by a girl with pink hair. She exclaimed that it was a charming display of male friendship, and began to approach the boys. Those, in turn, turned their heads in the direction of the sound. The heroine made an innocent facial expression and asked them to ignore it. Readers might have thought that An was embarrassed, because a second later, blood dripped from his nose. He asked her what her name was, except she didn't have time to give a reply, because Lan Sung-no asked if the girl had just taken a picture with them, pointing to the camera. She nodded positively and pointed at the technique. However, the protagonist exclaimed indignantly that his comrade was focusing on the wrong thing. Her name was Suiju Yuhue. The girl with bright green eyes was a pleasure to meet. Moreover, according to her words, she was simply blown away by their strong male friendship, so she found it very attractive. Her face took on a red hue because she glanced at the photos, which, in her opinion, turned out pretty good. Except that the guys were puzzled. The story shifts the narrative to a description of the location of the physical test. Next to the treadmill stood a group of boys standing in 4 rows. In the next episode, readers emphasize their attention to the appearance of the main character, who with a grin struck his right fist into his left palm. He mentally concluded that even with this new body, he was still the strongest warrior. Moreover, and resented how the others could discuss who a warrior was in front of him. He thought it was ridiculous because once they saw his magnificent results, they would be blown away. The first test was a physical fitness test, or to be more precise, an endurance race. The protagonist had already adopted a pose, standing on one knee, spreading both arms to different sides and lowering his head. Suddenly, the instructor fired a shot, which meant the command march. The story described how An rushed forward rapidly. His rapid movement provoked a small stream of air, and his desire to win was reflected in his bright yellow eyes with white pupil that gave him the appearance of a predator. Mentally, he rejoiced that now he would be able to take the first place and set a record at the same time. But he was the last to arrive. As he approached the finish line, An was literally gulping for air to regain his breath. An instructor in a red and white uniform announced that the protagonist had broken the record for the worst performance in history. He fell to the ground, causing everyone else to laugh and point their fingers at Anna. According to his thoughts, this body was just awful. Moreover, he couldn't even believe it. The second physical test began, a test of arm muscle strength. The instructor announced for An to take the last seat. The latter, in turn, grabbed his arm, biting his lower lip. As it became known after a short period of time, he sprained his wrist. The third physical test was the long jump, which he also failed. Sidu Liu jumped 2 meters while he jumped 1. The girl closed her eyes and once again cursed aloud at the protagonist. The wind was developing her snow-white hair, giving her an attractive look. The test was over, and An was last in the overall standings. That line sent an electric-like charge through the main character's body. He grabbed his head with both hands and kneeled down, opening his mouth pitifully and lowering his head down, and made a suffering expression for the simple and obvious reason that this was the worst result ever. Moreover, he could be kicked out. Lanzuno sat beside him and scratched the back of his head. And Suiju Yuhui grabbed her camera and mentally made the assumption that this might be the last time she would be able to take a picture of them together, which was a pity. In the next episode, the instructor asked Captain Yaetang a question according to which An didn't make it to the second stage of the test. He pointed at the main character around whom Larsuno was sitting and Suiju Yuhui was jumping. At this moment, Jai Yaetang's face creased. The man closed his eyes and waved his head in a gesture that even though this guy's results were hopeless, he was still eligible to take part in the second stage of the test. Except, in his opinion, it would be his last. The captain turned around and threw an angry look of yellow eyes at the instructor and ordered him to start the second stage of the test, to which he gave an affirmative answer. Someone's voice alerted the participants that the second stage was about to begin. Scattered like ants, they heard that it would be a test for compatibility with the crossbreeding technique, which greatly caught the main character's attention, and stood up, leaning on his feet with both hands, and raised his yellow eyes that looked surprised for some reason. After a short period of time, a smug smile appeared on his face. All participating cadets were asked to proceed to the testing area. At this moment, the guy thought that this could be his chance, because 60 years ago he had the best synchronization level, around 96%. The story brought to life the silhouette of a great warrior whose eyes stood out clearly against his dark figure. Although, according to the current protagonist, his body was physically so-so, but synchronization depended on willpower. After this thought, a fire appeared in his eyes that symbolized his striving and faith. Everyone in this squad had made fun of him, but now he wanted to see who would have the last laugh. Moreover, the guy wished with every fiber of his being to show them what the synchronization level of the strongest warrior looked like. An unusual aura appeared around him, emphasizing his mysterious eyes. It appeared in the form of white smoke, which enveloped the skinny body of the character. The story again showed readers a group of guys who lined up in several rows. And in the next episode, the main character appeared dressed in a black top with room for a demonic core. He looked around himself with both hands up and wondered. The boy was curious as to how crossbreeding was done in the future. In his opinion, it would even be easier that way. Suddenly, the man shouted at the top of his voice, announcing that the synchronization level was 39%. The readers could see a black silhouette with blonde hair. As it turned out, it belonged to Sidu Liu. Everyone around admired her, calling her result worthy. The test had been passed for her. After a short period of time, it was revealed that the highest score was only 39%. Moreover, it could be heard among the crowd that this might have been the best result this year. The martial arts clans and the results were quite different. At this moment, the spectators could see the blue eyes of a girl who had a pipe attached to her chest, from which a bright green light was emitted. Princess Nesmayana watched the situation with her mouth open. But it seemed to be difficult for her, for a large drop of sweat rolled down her right cheek. The men in the crowd were whispering about how they could win the favor of such a beautiful girl. However, and was not interested in this, he was even upset by the behavior of his comrades. The heroine seemed to start glowing, and thanks to the new episode, the readers could see a green stone on her chest, which gave off an unusual aura. Sidu Liu ostentatiously flipped her hair and exhaled, making her seem somewhat arrogant. And the guys continued to whisper that this was worthy of the strongest recruit this year. They reasoned that Sidu Liu was from a martial arts clan. Moreover, there were rumors that she had spent a lot of time training since childhood. Others talked about how she simply had talent. No matter how hard they tried, they wouldn't be able to get the first place. In the next episode, they discussed the fact that even her ponytail looked good, however she was fine with her hair loose too. The girl came from a good clan, had a lot of potential, and looked great. The crowd tried to convince themselves that they were just here to give the appearance of quantity, because this was a downright unattainable skill level. Sidu Liu disappeared into the rest room, the door of which instantly closed behind her. The story described how the heroine greedily gulped air to regain her breath from admiring herself. Her face flushed, and mentally she was genuinely happy that she was able to score 39%. The girl giggled in her head and clenched her left fist, inspecting her body. She was sure she had made an impression, because everyone could see it. She mumbled out loud while cooling her face that although she didn't care that she had so many admirers, it was still so exciting. Sidu Liu tried to calm herself down and make herself stop worrying. The story emphasized the reader's attention on the main character, who was clearly impressed by something. The guy covered the lower part of his face and watched with his right eyebrow arched. As it turned out, he was surprised that the girl had managed to achieve 39% synchronization during the test. He was interrupted by Lan Zuno, who punched his buddy in the shoulder and made an assumption after looking at him that if she was strong in body, she was strong in spirit as well. The guy could feel her power in her petite body. He cast his gaze somewhere forward, making his face dark with shadow, which gave him a somewhat pensive look. However, and replied that he too felt that Sidu Liu was strong. A drop of sweat ran down his cheek, as if he was worried. Except, in the brown-haired guy's opinion, the main character wasn't worried in the slightest. To which he made it clear that he was used to such a thing. The last phrase surprised on his comrade. As it turned out, during the test, many of the cadets who first encountered the crossbreeding technique often experienced painful sensations. For example, a guy with a bald head fought when a tube with an orange light was attached to him. When the person underwent the crossing for the first time, his body tensed up a lot. At that moment, it was known that the character had passed the test because his synchronization level was as much as 12%. He collapsed to the floor, breathing heavily. The story alerted that it was necessary to withstand the force coming from the demon's core. Some couldn't endure the pain and so they gave up. The picture described how the girl with pink hair arched up and screamed at the top of her voice that she couldn't take it anymore. The required synchronization level was 10%. That was all that was needed to pass the test. And now it was Lan Zuno's turn. His core was yellow in color, and he passed the test with a score of 24%. Of course, the results of some were unexpected. In the next episode, Suiju Yui appeared, her face turning red. It was difficult for her to be embarrassed. The end of the tube was glowing a bright blue color. The girl also passed the test because her synchronization level was as much as 30%. The story focused the reader's attention on Captain Jai Yaden, who mused aloud that this time, there were those among the cadets who gave hope. He crossed his arms on his chest and watched them. The girl behind him added that Suiju Yui was now among them. She held a clipboard and looked into it. This time, there are already 6 cadets in the trial whose level has reached 30% or higher. Compared to other C-class cities, they had quite good results. However, the man was pondering about something. In his opinion, there were some not-so-good ones. He looked at the main character, who at this moment turned his head upwards, casting a smug look at the captain. Conversations were heard among the crowd. They recognized Anna. The guys made the bold assumption that with fitness like his, the guy would probably spit blood from the exertion. They laughed at him. The warriors called him the very last one, for he had failed the tests in the last phase. However, the protagonist was mentally confident. Moreover, he was not hurt by the mockery of his comrades, because what he would show in the near future they had never been able to see before. On tensed all the muscles of his face, which expressed his eagerness. It was his turn. Chapter 3. The story continued its compelling narrative. This time, the picture described how the main character said out loud that he was choosing the red core by pointing his finger at it. As it turned out, the cannonballs they received on the battlefield were divided into 6 types. Among them, the 4 most frequently used were red, yellow, green, and blue. The first represented strength, yellow represented defense, green represented healing properties, and blue showed dexterity. But the purple core, which was responsible for the skill of controlling illusions, and the black core, which took the function of controlling time and space, were extremely rare. The black one was the rarest. The main character in the new episode was attached to the system, holding a red core in his left hand. The synchronization began. The most important thing, in Anna's opinion, was willpower. He cast a quick glance at the chest to which the core was glued. Willpower determined how much load from the demon core a person could endure. In the next instant, the story showed all the nerve endings in the main character's skeleton, which seemed to have an electric-like charge running through it. To be more precise, how much the character would be able to subdue the core. Anna's facial expression became more serious and focused. He clenched his teeth and watched the red stone. The crossing had begun. He was approached by a man who asked a question, according to which he wanted to make sure that the guy was ready. The man, in turn, gave a positive answer. After a short period of time, a bright red glow appeared in the rest room, which worried everyone. Sidu Liu thought about how strong the recoil was. He opened his mouth and turned his head towards the light, seeing that it was coming from Anna. The guy was mentally urging everyone to look at him because he wished to show them the strongest warrior's level of synchronization. At this moment, Lan Zeno uttered that his comrade wasn't that easy, and Suiju Yui grabbed her camera. The synchronization rate reached the 40% mark, but it kept increasing, which surprised the workers, who spread their arms in amazement. The protagonist strained a victorious smile because in his time, he had reached 96. He tensed up with the goal that he could give out more. From that, a mysterious dark aura appeared around his body, which mixed with the red hue of the demon core. A small stream of air even appeared around him. Charges ran through all the tubes that were connected to the character's body. The crowd of warriors didn't understand how the mark could go even higher, because the measurement was still going on. The numbers were succeeding each other, 45, 50, 60. At this moment, Captain Jai Yaetang literally squeezed through the wall as he could not believe what he was seeing. No one understood what was happening because such a high level of synchronization was simply impossible. In his opinion, it was some kind of mistake. The girl behind him exclaimed that the synchronization level had increased to 80% again. Some in the crowd were watching the protagonist with startled facial expressions, wondering what kind of stunts he was performing. Once again, someone yelled out a system error. The story emphasized the reader's attention on Anna, who mentally thought that he should have been considered a king because he was the strongest warrior. If that core wasn't so complicated, and if his body wasn't so weak, he could bring everyone to their knees. People covered their eyes from the bright red glow. This was the difference between it and them. The main character's eyes shrank, as if something had knocked him out of space. In the next episode, he appeared as if in another world, floating first in white smoke, then in darkness, and then in a red river with his arms spread out in different directions. As suddenly, a red mysterious silhouette appeared before the readers. It had sharp horns and long hair. This huge figure was pulling its paws towards Anu, who did not understand what was happening. because all the energy had gone somewhere. Suddenly the tube disconnected itself, and the protagonist himself began to spit black liquid. The guy asked to stop, because his body could not withstand such a strong load. In response, the employee yelled at him, saying that it was indeed like a malfunction in the equipment. After a short period of time, it became known that the synchronization level had dropped to 10%. The girl turned to the captain, saying that they had just discovered a broken demon core. Perhaps it was defective, and that was why there was a data error, which was even scary to some extent. However, Jai Yaetang seemed very upset. He exhaled heavily and closed his eyes, and after a couple of seconds, he asked, trying to make sure that the final result of the synchronization level was 10%. The heroine gave a positive answer, adding that it had passed the test. At that moment, the guy was lying on the cold floor, surrounded by 2 employees. There was talk among the crowd that this demon core had turned out to be defective. At this point, his comrade ran up to the protagonist, and one of the employees informed him that nothing terrible had happened, because the guy was just overworked. He would be fine when he rested. People couldn't believe that such a flimsy guy could have such a huge level of synchronization. They laughed at him, for such a level was almost as high as the captains of S-cities. Lanzuno lifted his buddy's head, asking him how he was feeling, to which the latter spoke of his grandfather. The story described the strange reaction of Princess Nesmayana. The girl followed the main character, and after a moment she relaxed, arguing that her behavior was that she worried in vain. Sidu Liu had already considered that there was at least someone better than her in this city. She was not to be missed. Lanzuno lifted Anna, who made a dying look, into his arms. The protagonist could not believe what had just happened, so he got the urge to swear in him. Fortunately, the test he passed after all. Sueju Yuhui filmed them from different angles, finding the sight cute. The narration changed the scene to the recreation room, where the recovered An was sitting. He lowered his head and wondered what it was. A red stone was visible on his chest. In his opinion, it was as if all the energy had been instantly drained out of him. This had never happened before. Moreover, it was obvious that he would be able to reach at least 80% with his willpower. The protagonist tensed his eyebrows, making his wrinkles more visible. His skin hid in shadow, which strongly emphasized his bright yellow eyes. However, he still wondered, and wanted to know the reason, because even the most corrupted cores were not supposed to break. In the next moment, something caught his attention. He turned his head to the right side where the exit was. A tall dark silhouette with a bright red core appeared in the door. Someone gave the order for everyone to stand still. The protagonist tried to stand up, his whole body trembling. As it became known after a short period of time, it was Commander Jai Yaetang who entered surrounded by other people. He congratulated everyone who had made it to the final stage of the test and retracted his hands back. He then mumbled that this would be a practical task. His gaze hardened, revealing a view of yellow eyes, accentuating his frowning bushy eyebrows that gave off shadows. The warriors would have to face a demon for the first time in their lives. The story described a hormonal red creature with a predatory gaze that stood opposite a trembling character with a small blade. The man hoped that each of them would be able to get through this safely and successfully. But judging from the faces of the characters themselves, they didn't like the idea at all, for they were all covered in cold sweat. Someone with a bald spot on his head shouted at the top of his voice, telling the third squad to start forming up and march. At this moment, the protagonist was trailing behind with both hands down. As he crawled beside Jai Yaetang, he said aloud how bad he felt without paying attention. A shadow reflected on the captain's face, expressing some displeasure. He stood up straight with his arms at his sides, except that the look of his yellow eyes showed that the man was afraid. His eyebrows frowned, which meant he was pondering on something. In the next episode, the story described that something red in the corner of the recreation room attracted the captain. He approached and picked up the object, grabbing it with his right hand. It was a shard of a demon core. The man remained silent and quickly turned his head toward the exit where the dark silhouette of the main character had gotten out. He wondered what and would be able to show a little later. Moreover, Jai Yaetang mumbled that he was looking forward to the next stage, the blind hunt. Chapter 4. The narrative describes to readers a huge wall, within which were towers and small structures that were difficult to see from a bird's eye view. Someone gave the order to open the gates. The group of people stood in front of a tall stone wall several meters high with large doors. As suddenly, the gates began to rise, opening a pathway for sunlight to enter. It lent its glow to the space, allowing the air to come in the form of white smoke. In some ways it was even blinding. Each of the newcomers was watching with admiration. They exclaimed, because it was the first time they had ever been out against the wall. The main character, on the other hand, tried to shield his eyes from the overly bright light. Apparently he was trying to let them get used to it. The wind played with his disheveled hair, making him look careless. Someone in the crowd asked a question. As it became known, this character was interested in whether after 60 years everyone lived in such closed cities. But he was ignored because a new question followed, according to which someone wanted to verify the truth of the following fact. He wondered, asking the others what they thought about whether the fog was always outside the city walls, except that he, too, was left unanswered. At this point, an order was heard. Some character with a demanding tone of voice made everyone stop talking and organize silence outside the city walls. This someone had instructed them, if they had any time to spare, to check their equipment, for they would not even know the reason why they had died. The group of newcomers lined up in 4 rows and moved towards the open gate. In the next episode, the story emphasized the reader's attention to the main character. On was holding his right hand on the red demon core at this time and pondering on the topic of being given a new undamaged one, except he was convinced that that was the problem. According to his thoughts, the moment the energy disappeared, the guy had a feeling that something inside him had rejected the demon core. He didn't realize what was happening. However, in the next moment, the protagonist allowed himself to make a bold assumption, according to which it happened because of time travel. He kept walking, looking under his feet at the same time, and as his right limb stepped into the sand, something changed in the protagonist's gaze. His yellow irises shrank to an unimaginable size. The shadow of his long black bangs hid the heavy gaze that was emphasized by his arched, thin eyebrows, and clenched his jaw, baring his white teeth. His face was filled with fear. The aura around him turned dark, and the space seemed to flow with all the colors, becoming completely black with the clear lines of the surrounding objects. Readers could notice pulsating red lines appearing around the protagonist that went beyond the border of the gate, except their scope turned out to be much larger. The fluctuations were gaining momentum, wrapping around the wilderness a few dozen meters from the wall, if not kilometers. Moreover, as the following episodes might have made it appear, they were reaching the demons who had been wandering about the deserted land some time before, and who now raised their heads as if they smelled prey. Apparently, such a sudden movement provoked them to rush away in the direction from which it had started. The story began describing to readers a huge cave that was held up by large wooden roots reinforcing the stone structure. That was where the ripples entered. It appeared to be very dark inside. The movement continued to build up, forcing the audience to look deep into this darkness. In it, readers could see a mysterious silhouette surrounded by a pile of skulls, illuminated by a torch alone. This creature sat on a throne made of large vines. Red vibrations moved towards it, raising a small smoke or mist. This caught the attention of the black figure, who bared his fangs, saying aloud that this could not be. It was not entirely clear to the onlookers what he was saying, but bright sparks from the flames illuminated his shadow on the stone. As it became known after a short time, the creature could not accept the fact that there was a demon more powerful than him in this world. Around him, the ground shook, and in the next moment, the story turned its attention to the protagonist, whose facial expression expressed fear. The boy furrowed his brow and tightened the muscles in his face, making his eyes seem as if they were drowning in a pool of terror. As it turned out, On guessed that he had just seen a demon. From just that thought, an evil aura condensed around him, and the protagonist thought that for a second it seemed to him as if something inside him had responded. Someone pulled him out of his musings. The character wondered why On wasn't moving, which made his gaze come alive again. The guy turned his head over his right shoulder and saw Sita Liu. The girl was standing behind his back, crossing both arms on her chest, and watching his reaction. However, and pretended as if he hadn't heard. The protagonist scratched his head with his left hand and apologized, making a guilty expression. In the new episode, the couple was approached by Lan Seung-no, who asked his comrade a question. He wanted to know what was going on with him. Suaju Yuhui appeared next to the guy, who was once again holding a camera. When the character had just spotted the rest of the warriors, they were suddenly called out. The silhouette that stood against the sand and forest floor shouted at the top of his voice for the 4 behind him to work as a group. The others were already ready, so they needed to approach. The main character gave an affirmative answer for everyone. At this time, the rest of the warriors had already lined up in 4 rows. Just as suddenly, Suaju Yuhui appeared to Anna's left, admiring him and making the assumption that this was his strategy for teamwork. She happily put on a smile and smugly looked at the guy when he gave a clear negative answer. Except he didn't have time to say his next line because he was interrupted by Sita Liu, who asked him to stay out of the way. Outwardly, the heroine may have seemed confident, but inside she was still a girl. In her head, Princess Nesmayana showed readers that she was so afraid regarding the fact that no one would want to work with her on a team. However, the story quickly changed the target to Lan Seung-no, who approached and had offered him a nomination. The guy touched his buddy with his right hand, thus supporting his back, and said aloud that they also needed to give their best. Well, of course, Suiju Yuhui did not leave such a shot without attention. In the next episode, the girl took a new shot in front of the trio, who didn't even notice what she was doing. The heroine showed her index and middle fingers, mouthing the words of entreaty that they were going to succeed. She smiled while trying to capture the receding figures of her partners. The narration familiarized readers with the information, based on which the obelisk of dispersion was presented as a black square and solid stone of huge size. The audience could see a large structure several dozen meters high, enclosed by a wall. The stone from which it was constructed consisted of a special substance that allowed the dispersion of fog. Suddenly, a stranger in a red and white suit, who folded both hands behind his back, announced in a loud voice that the third stage was in teams of 4. Behind him was a lifeless land in the form of sand and small mountains with some visible greenery. In front of him were 3 columns with warriors who were dressed absolutely identical. The man continued his monologue, adding that he hoped that the purpose of the task was clear to everyone, because it was a blind hunt. Now the group assignment began. Each warrior was given a battle dagger and a mini fog dispersal device. As it turned out, it was made of the same stone as the dispersal obelisk. In her hands, hidden in black mittens, was a flask containing a black stone. The task was as simple as possible. First, they had to enter an area with fog and then reach the designated location. On the episode, it was marked by a red dot in the sand, with bushes and a wall around it. Next, a fog dispersal device had to be set up, and subsequently, the hunt for demons of lower ranks was to begin. The performance of each of the newcomers would be evaluated according to individual skills and teamwork. That is, either the character passed or failed miserably. The instructor wished everyone good luck as he finally finished his explanation. Blind Hunt, that's what the third stage was called. In front of the reader's eyes was a picture that held the image of unfamiliar monsters that had red eyes. They were moving in a herd. This test was the fear of any newcomer who had to overcome this. As it became known, in this already fog-shrouded world, the warriors were to do battle with unknown dangers that lurked in an unseen space. The story described how one of the characters, a man with a large build, moved toward a red dot that glowed brightly even through the fog. It took more than just physical fitness and experience to become a warrior. The group of 4 boys rushed to run, crossing obstacles and looking back. There was no telling how the warriors would behave when they encountered danger. Now a guy with dark short hair hoisted a flask with a once black stone that turned red in the next instant. He did it instantly, in flight, while the rest of his comrades surrounded the character, keeping an eye on their surroundings. Working as a team, everyone had a chance to overcome their fear. The next episode describes how 4 warriors were surrounded by 3 demons. These creatures looked like huge dogs. They had red skin with white stripes, long black curls, and bald tails. They opened their mouths, preparing to grab their prey. Except the 4 who were watching, the demons were supposed to be hunting, destroying them that got in their way. Eventually, after the first demon kill, the newcomers would become true warriors. The story told how the trumpet fish managed to crush one of the red-skinned creatures. But apparently not only him, because they were sitting relaxedly on their carcasses, trying to recover the breath that had been knocked down from the battle. Finally, the challenge began. The newcomers broke into teams of 4. They stood next to the wall, ready to begin. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice announced that the next group should get ready. Readers could see 3 figures standing on the high wall. The story allowed us to hear their conversation. Someone looking at the teams scattered on the bare field said that there were a lot of newcomers this time. It was a girl with long fiery hair. However, based on her words, she was pursuing her personal goals, and she was only interested in Seidu Liu of the Seidu clan. As it turned out, the story introduced the audience to the captain of the second squad of Heliki City, Dada Jiao. The heroine turned her head over her left shoulder and asked the others what they thought. Among them, the readers could see Jai Yaetang and another character who had short dark hair with a blue tint arranged in a low ponytail. He agreed with her aloud and added on his own behalf that Seidu Liu came out of their martial arts clan, and with good training as well. It was the captain of the first squad of Heilatsi City, Joel. In his opinion, she could really be a worthy warrior. Jai Yaetang said with both arms crossed over his chest that there was one more person they should have paid attention to. His gaze fell on the protagonist who was waving his arms as he stood in front of his comrades. On smiled, glinting with the yellow of his eyes. As it became known, the captain of the third squad had specifically checked, and it turned out that the previous demon core the protagonist carried was definitely fine. Except that he didn't understand what had happened back then. Just as suddenly, Dada Jiao lightly tapped his ear to interrupt his stream of thoughts. She asked him what he was thinking about. The sunlight fell on her figure, leaving her face in shadow. However, it emphasized her bright eyes. The heroine addressed Jai Yaetang as if he were Tantan. Readers could see the man's face instantly turn red. He was embarrassed because he asked that the second squad captain not call him that. The girl was toying with him, and Joel, smiling, noticed that only she could make Tantan blush. This only made Jai Yaetang angry. He exclaimed that the captain of the first squad was not allowed to speak like that at all. However, in a moment, everything stopped. Dada Jayal said in a serious tone of voice, the demons were divided into ranks. She looked at her companions and continued. It was learned that only the lower-ranked demons they had trained should be in the trial area. Jai Yaetang asked her not to worry because for the safety of today's trial, they had been making sure that there wasn't even a rank 1 demon in the vicinity of Heliki City for several days. His sentiment was echoed by Joel and added on his own behalf that even if they did show up, they would do everything to protect their future warriors. The trio continued to watch the battles being fought. Chapter 5. The story continues to drive a compelling narrative. The painting describes to the readers how Joel mumbled that if demons did show up, they would do anything to protect their future warriors. And the trio continued to watch as the battles were fought. In the new episode, it was revealed that the test for a certain group was over. The site was prepared, so the next team had to get ready. There was talk that it was Sidhu Liu's group, and what's more, On was also there. The protagonist stood up, holding the flask in his right hand, and said aloud that it was their turn. A smile could be seen on everyone's face, as if they had been waiting for this fight for a long time. Lan Zeno crunched his knuckles, Suiju Yuhui held a small dagger in her left hand, and Sidhu Liu turned her head over her right shoulder with both limbs tucked behind her back and looked where the others were. The story described to readers how the protagonist wanted to hand the flask to a character with long fingernails, apparently a female character. Just as suddenly, the girl snatched it away, leaving Anna pondering. He arched his eyebrows, as if he hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. The guy cast a quick glance at his right hand, which just held the flask. But there was no next reaction, because Sidhu Liu rushed to run. She lightly turned around towards her comrades who were left behind and shouted at them in a demanding voice to move behind her. Except she liked it when all they could do was stare at her with their mouths hanging open. The protagonist closed his eyes and clenched his jaws, making the muscles in his face tense. In his opinion, Princess Nesmayana liked to be the center of attention. Except, of course, they obeyed her. All 4 of them rushed forward when the heroine again with a demanding tone of voice signaled them to keep up. The boys moved toward the red object that hovered above the lifeless ground. Their speed was so fast that they kicked up small puffs of dust, mixing with the fog. Which, incidentally, is where the characters in the next episode found themselves. Sidhu Liu jumped up and landed with her right leg out first. Anna could be seen behind her. Just as suddenly, the girl was in the air again. Such rapid movement surprised the protagonist to some extent. And not only him, the entire trio watched the rapid actions of Sidhu Liu, who did a somersault while holding a flask in her left hand. With her movements, it was as if she was dispersing the fog. And when the heroine turned the body around, lowering it face down to the sandy ground, she was able to see the terrain, on which all that was there was a round object that gave off a red glow. As suddenly a small stream of wind suddenly formed around it. The red light took on a blue hue. As it turned out, it was because Sidhu Liu had managed to set up the black stone flask. At this moment, Dada Jayao marveled at the girl's abilities, for although she had a green health core, she still moved as well as she did with a blue agility core. She put on a satisfied smile and went on to say that the heroine was a true descendant of the martial arts clan. In the next episode, the story describes to the readers the faces of 3 demons. They had red skin and eyes of the same color, but without irises or pupils. They had sharp teeth and large ears. The monsters made terrifying sounds and simultaneously ran towards Sidhu Liu, who had already risen on both legs and adopted an attacking posture. The protagonist called out to Lan Zuno, warning him that it was time to start. He, in turn, responded positively and made a wave of his hands, glancing downward. A mist thickened around him, swirling around the tall lad's figure, and the ground beneath his feet pushed upwards. A bright yellow light appeared in Lan Zuno's eyes, which had his demon core. In the next instant, he was high in the sky. Apparently, with this movement, he was going to get close to the monsters whose dark silhouettes were heading towards Sidhu Liu as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the character landed in front of her, grouping himself and hitting the ground with his right hand, causing it to shake. The girl was greatly surprised by his appearance. However, the demons continued their attack. They were already quite close to Lan Zuno, who was holding a dagger. A bright yellow aura was glowing around his right hand. And in the new episode, when the protagonist and Suiju Yuhui caught up with them, it became even more dazzling, increasing the radius of illumination. Readers could notice a seal appeared under each monster. This kind of eagerness surprised Jai Yaetang. The man put on a happy smile and said that the situation was not bad, as the guy was already used to his core. The story brought the reader's attention back to the newcomers. One of them twirled a dagger in his hand. As it turned out, it was An. He gave the order to kill the monsters one by one. At that moment, the demons appeared in the sky. The guy called out to Sita Liu, and Suiju Yuhui and gripped his dagger tighter, gazing upwards. Each of them gave a positive response, and all three of them simultaneously took a step that was accompanied by a small stream of air. Moreover, an aura even appeared around them. Princess Nesmayana had green, the protagonist had red, Suiju Yuhui had blue, and Lan Zeno had yellow, while the latter held the honeycomb-shaped dome, and then the girls rushed towards the danger. The story described that the first round came to Suiju Yuhui. The bright green eyes stood out clearly against the pink hair. There was an eagerness reflected in them. The girl swooped down on the monsters with maneuvering movements, as if this was some kind of game to her. The demon didn't even have time to reflect her attack or resist in any way. At the last moment, the heroine leaped onto its red carcass and with a jolt made it fall to the lifeless ground. The creature, without making any noise, flew away, defeated. The story then described how Lan Zuno dealt crushing blows to the same demon. A yellow-colored aura glowed around them. He used his fists. In the next instant, the monster left a mark in the ground and disappeared behind a column of dust. At last Joel spoke. He watched the battle from the high wall and said in a surprised tone of voice that the two of them were really working well together, especially the girl, because the blue agility core made her movements smoother. The man rather strained a smile and lightly covered his mouth. His face became slightly ruddy as Jai Yaetang suddenly managed to object to him. The second round was between the red-skinned demon and Sidu Liu. The girl's eyes reflected his silhouette. She was angry and focused at the same time. The girl jumped up with her legs braced and made a swinging motion. A green aura glowed around her. Just as suddenly, she struck the creature with her dagger, causing a bright column of green-colored monster blood to appear in the air. In the next episode, readers saw that the demon's body began to turn into slime, causing it to furiously start making horrible noises. The heroine instantly found herself on the sandy ground as the monster fell, raising clouds of dust. The word burn could be heard from her lips, as suddenly, a huge explosion with a green light appeared behind her back. The third round was between the demon and N. The main one was in the air instantly, striking his opponent, causing him to fly off in a twisted state. In his right hand he held a dagger, which he had already wound up on the hull, preparing it for another attack. His bright yellow eyes reflected his eagerness and desire to win. In his head, he pondered the fact that he had three vulnerabilities to deal with first. The first was the throat. The blow to it caused the monster to open its mouth, trying to let out a scream. The second was the heart, and the last was the belly. The protagonist made his attack, causing the demon to fall backwards. On tensed his eyebrows with tension, so a small wrinkle appeared on his forehead. The creature rolled across the sandy ground, kicking up dust and playing with the fog. As it turned out, the protagonist's body was also carried away, but luckily far away from the monster. Only he managed to stick his dagger into the ground, which allowed him to stop. Based on his thoughts, it was clear that the explosive power of his flimsy body was indeed meager. He needed to take a chance and test what it was capable of. In the next instant, a red glow appeared around Anna, who had lowered his body down slightly, and the ground beneath his feet began to crack. Just as suddenly, this guy instantly moved towards the demon, who was definitely not expecting it. The readers could distinguish the red eyes that were burning with core magic in that dark silhouette. Chapter 6. The next part of the story begins with the rapid movement of the protagonist. His dark silhouette appeared in front of the demon, who clearly did not expect this. To prevent another attack, the creature put his right hand behind his body so that all the power was directed into a fist. At that moment, and was under his body, gaining momentum. He managed to dodge the monster's blow as it brought its red limb closer to the boy's frail body. On moved closer and stabbed his opponent in the belly with his dagger. Apparently, the force of the blow was quite good, because the red-skinned demon bared his fangs and roared. However, in the character's opinion, it was too slow. One could see some resentment in its yellow eyes. Just as suddenly, the monster swung its right leg. It was followed by a quick stream of air, but Anu managed to dodge it. He stood in the same place, only he arched his back. His reaction was so fast that a red trace of his glowing eyes was left in space. In the next episode, the man gripped the dagger tighter. With his right hand, he rested it on the ground. The character turned his body, thus attracting the attention of the demon, who had already prepared his claws. Its large shadow fell on the protagonist as it suddenly struck again with its cold weapon in its belly. The red-skinned monster drew back. According to Anna's thoughts, he was moving too incoherently. But, as it might have seemed, the demon had had enough of these games. He clenched his jaw harder. On his fangs, readers could see green blood. His red eyes burned with hatred. The monster advanced toward the protagonist and brought his right hand close to his body, pulling a column of air or white mist behind him. Except that in the next episode, the story describes how On nimbly dodged the impending danger. He aimed his dagger at his opponent's wounded skin. A short time later, the guy was in the air. He pushed off from the lifeless ground and, while the demon hovered in space, gave him a crushing blow, leaving a red mark in the air. As it turned out, it still didn't have enough explosive power. The monster fell face down, rolling on the sandy foundation, while the protagonist grouped up and landed on his feet, supporting his torso with his free hand. Both kicked up dust that blurred their silhouettes slightly. He was watched by 3 of his comrades. In Lanzuno's opinion, it was as if he was playing with a red-skinned demon. He made a silly expression as he opened his mouth and bulged his dark eyes as he watched his buddy's dexterous movements. Suiju Yuhui, on the other hand, managed to film everything. She held the camera and prepared to take another picture. However, Seidu Liu alone was not happy. Mentally, she concluded that and was showing off on purpose. The story turned the reader's attention to Dada Jiao, who wondered aloud. She was interested in who this skinny boy was. Moreover, she thought his power was pretty good. Joel entered into a dialogue with her and mumbled that it wasn't just about strength, but also about the way he moved. In his opinion, the guy was very skillful. Jai Yaeteng, on the other hand, seemed far from happy. He tensed his thick blonde eyebrows, making every wrinkle on the upper part of his face visible. The man silently observed the situation going on. At this moment, the last demon was wallowing in green paint, and the protagonist was slouching, leaning on his feet. He greedily gulped air, trying to recover his confused breathing. This was the end. On was mired in his thoughts, one of them being that in this body he couldn't use any skills from his past. The character was covered in sweat that ran down his cheek. He arched an eyebrow and looked at his opponent thoughtfully. Moreover, he didn't like the shortness of breath at the slightest movement. It made him very nervous. The protagonist took a step and mumbled that his ordeal was over. Now it was time to finish the demon. The creature at this point stood on 4 limbs, glaring angrily at Anna. As the monsters approached him, he saw a red glowing light in his feet that was coming out of the ground. This alerted the guy greatly, as suddenly in the next episode, there was an explosion. Or rather a red magic pillar that came crashing down on the demon's body, throwing it up and Anna aside. Moreover, all 4 characters were surrounded by some tree vines, which incidentally, Suiju Yuhui had made a guess about. The guys looked around at their surroundings, except that the main character's attention was drawn to something else. He was looking at a monster whose body was high up, and took a step back and wondered what it was. Suddenly, the black silhouette of someone's clawed hand appeared. As it turned out, something tried to appear from behind the red-clothed opponent who was now immobilized. A muscular silhouette with a white top appeared on the horizon. However, judging from the reaction of the protagonist, it was a horrible sight. The shadow from his long black bangs fell on his face. The yellow eyes reflected fear or rather incomprehension. The new opponent had a skull-shaped head only without a nose or eyes. Steam was coming out of his mouth. The next moment, it let out a loud roar that reached as far as the wall. A mysterious red aura stretched towards it and the 3 characters on it. The roar caught Jai Yaeteng's attention, causing his bright yellow eyes to hide a shadow of surprise. And then there were the guards. They shrank to an unthinkable size. The eyebrows tensed. The man tilted his head, causing a shadow to fall across his face. Suddenly, his voice rang out. As it turned out, it was a demon of the 1st rank. He ordered all the newcomers to return outside the city walls. They rushed in the opposite direction, traversing the huge vines. Everyone screamed in terror that they had just met a demon of the 1st rank. There was fear and panic on their faces. In the next instant, Dada Jiao and Joel rushed to the aid of their would-be warriors while the 3rd squad leader stayed behind to watch them. 2 explosions appeared on the lifeless ground, triggering the formation of large pillars of dust that raised wind in their wake. The storm rose almost at the level of the wall, on which, by the way, the readers could notice the absence of Jai Yaeteng. The girl and the commander of the 1st squad rushed towards the threat with mortal expressions on their faces. The heroine exclaimed for everyone to stop panicking because it was safe to be around Captain Jai Yaeteng. Moreover, she made a promise that he would help all of them reach the city walls, except that the story saw fit at this very moment to transfer the attention of the audience to the monster, which, apparently, had the ability to speak. As it turned out, he was surprised that there were people in front of him, because the creature wondered if there was a demon among them. He posed the question to the four that stood before him. The monster wanted to know if any of them had the power of a demon. After that, the expression on the protagonist's face took on a horrified look. He was afraid. The guy's eyes began to shine even brighter against his skin that was dark from the shadows. No one understood what he was saying, except that only the demon saw his strange reaction and wondered if it was him. The monster was several times taller than the protagonist. He stretched out to his full height and began to move towards the guy, spreading a red, intimidating aura. The character adopted a defensive posture, holding a dagger firmly in his right hand. Some of his team audibly tried to ascertain the veracity of the fact that they had seen a rank 1 demon. Fear froze on the face of each of them. All three of them were shaking with fear. Sidu Liu thought in her head that this creature was not at all like the lower-ranked demons. The shadow fell over from its eyes, which rounded up to unthinkable sizes. In the girl's opinion, they would be finished in a few moments. She already imagined the vines encircling her body, immobilizing her completely. The monster came closer. As it turned out, its head was a helmet made of a skull without holes for eyes and nose, and the torso was dressed in white armor, which had small holes from which came a red light. Such a monstrous sight made a small drop of sweat run down Farah's face. Readers could see how nervous he was. The protagonist realized, of course, that this body would definitely not be able to withstand against a rank 1 demon. Moreover, this was the first time for him to feel such a thing. Ordinary warriors often said that they felt a sense of hopelessness when they faced demons. In the next moment, the monster's clawed paw howled upwards, accompanied by red smoke. The creature decided to try something. It had the urge to shackle everyone. Readers could see small red orbs emerge from its sharp fingers and take in all the light. And after a short period of time, they ended up on the foreheads of each of Anna's team. The characters rolled their eyes so that only their whites were visible. Their faces reflected a kind of horror. Their bodies tilted slightly forward and backward at the others. The next moment, the four fell without making a sound, their bodies raising dust that spilled out to the vines of the trees. And the monster, whose figure was like a skeleton in a black shell, kept its right hand tensed and watched the boys. Suddenly, the demon pointed his head slightly to the right side. As it turned out, its vine began to crack. A second later, it collapsed into splinters. The silhouettes of Dada Jiao and Joel emerged from it. They seemed to be floating in the air. The boy gave a demanding tone of voice, ordering the horrible creature not to touch the newcomers. Only the man, for his part, gave no intelligible answer. He turned his head in the direction from which the noise was coming and made his vines move. The branches that surrounded the newly minted warriors howled upward, raising clouds of dust after them and playing with the mist. The demon said goodbye to the men under the pretense that he needed to bow out. To some extent, this caught Dada Jiao by surprise, who was rapidly gaining speed. However, according to the monster, this was not their last encounter. Its figure disappeared into a huge crater that had formed in the ground. The squad leaders watched in silence as he disappeared. After a certain period of time, the girl asked her colleague. As it turned out, she was interested in the answer to the question, according to which the monster took 4 cadets with him. Joel, in turn, warily watched and remained silent. The hole was large in diameter. The fog began to fall into its abyss, from which strange sounds and an unusual vibration were heard. Readers could see the muscles in Joel's face tense. He tensed his eyebrows, making his wrinkles more defined. The man shouted at the top of his voice that they should have moved out after the demon and the newly minted warriors. Chapter 7. The gripping story continues the development of its narrative. It describes the natural beauty that equipped the lifeless land. Small bushes and tree roots adorned the horizon. Someone in the next episode noticed that all footprints were breaking off in that place. It was Dada Jiao. She tilted her body, resting on her feet, and watched as the unusual phenomenon in the ground stopped at nothing, although there were still air vapors emanating from it. According to the girl's words, Tan had been checking everything for a few days, except he had failed to notice the presence of a rank 1 demon, even though the man was always so thorough about it. The heroine's face expressed pity. In all likelihood, she felt fear from not knowing. Her fiery hair fell over her skin, chilling her shadow. As it turned out, this had never happened before. The story allowed readers to get a closer look at the end of the trail. The apparition was a representation of a spiral-shaped growth of mail, as if someone underground had been diligently digging it up. In the next episode, a silhouette with a red demon core appeared above the heads of the squad leaders. He called out to Dada Jiao and Joel, causing them to look up. It was Jai Yaetang. The man grouped up and landed on both feet, keeping his balance with his hands that flung in different directions. The blonde man asked a question to his companions, according to which they had managed to find the guys. With his appearance, Jai Yaetang provoked the appearance of dust, which swept upwards and slightly concealed from the figure. The man didn't understand why they had stopped, as they were supposed to continue their pursuit. It was as if a charge like an electric shock had gone through him. He tensed his bushy eyebrows, and his expression took on an intimidating look. The next moment, however, he was interrupted by Joel. The guy put both hands on his sides and looked at his colleague, at the same time asking him to behave a little more calmly. He pointed out to him the fact that the footprints were stopping at that place. Jai Yaetang looked down in front of him with a puzzled expression, trying to see something under the dust clouds. Dada Jiao straightened up and made the assumption that the demon had gone even deeper underground. The captain of the third squad crouched down slightly to reach the ground with his right hand. Except they didn't know what was up ahead. It was dangerous for them to go there. The man looked over to where the trail ended, which was clearly marked, and suddenly he remembered something. In Jai Yaetang's mind, episodes appeared in which a little boy with blonde hair was calling out for his brother. His little body was being carried by some purple-colored monster. The space around him was equipped with sparks and smoke from the flames. And in the next instant, the man struck the ground, making it seem to break through. He swore out loud to let off steam, for the situation was making him nervous. Jai Yaetang blamed himself for this. He lowered his head, causing a shadow to fall across his face. However, the dark skin brightly emphasized the light of his yellow eyes. The man was frustrated because he failed to see the threat. The character hit the ground again, then lighter this time. His buddies stood silently, towering over him, waiting for the man to feel better. Joel entered the dialogue and said aloud that they should have gone back to the city for the simple and obvious reason that there was probably panic there. It would be even worse without the three of them. However, afterward, he made a promise to send a scouting party to survey the area around the city to make sure there were no other rank 1 demons there. The story emphasized the reader's attention to Dada Jiao. The office was also drooping. She lowered her gaze and listened to her colleagues in silence. And after a short period of time, the girl called out to Tantan, adding about the 4 cadets that no one wanted this to happen. She put her left hand on his shoulder, trying to bring him to his senses. In her opinion, they needed to stay calm. Moreover, the heroine understood how difficult it was for Jai Yaetang. However, the man brushed her hand away and stood up while telling those to go back on their own because the captain of the third squad wanted to take another look. He asked not to worry about him. Joel was about to say something. The man tensed his eyebrows as if he was angry with his comrade, so he asked him if he was really serious. But Dada Jiao entered the conversation and asked Jai Yaetang to be sure to return before the sun set, to which he replied in the affirmative, flashing the yellow of his eyes. The man started to run and after a while his silhouette disappeared into the fog. He was accompanied by the looks of his companions all the way. The commander of the second squad turned to the commander of the first squad and said that they would not be able to stop Jai Yaetang. Joel tilted his head, ruffling his blue hair, and replied that he was well aware of that, for when his younger brother had been dragged away by the demons, he had blamed himself very much. The girl added for herself that if his brother had survived then, he would be as old as those cadets now. She lowered her pensive gaze and added that these children reminded him of his brother. In the next episode, the story told readers about a dark cave that became visible in someone's eyes. The protagonist looked at the mysterious environment and wondered where he was. The guy's face was pale, apparently from lack of light, and deep circles lingered under the dull eyes. He made the assumption that it was a cave of some kind. Readers could notice the vine on his torso that was under the red demon stone. The protagonist then looked at the poles to which his comrades were tied. He made sure that everyone was still alive. Suddenly, a voice came from behind him and said aloud that and was finally awake. Clawed paws touched the tree next to his head. The character's eyes reflected horror. They were rounded with fear. The guy with a sharp movement turned his head to the left side, flashing the yellow of his eyes, which shone even brighter in the darkness, and made a mental assumption, though a conviction, that it was a demon of the first rank. The monster was of a very large build, similar in some ways to a human. He had long black hair, and his back showed some sort of bone that turned red toward the ends. The demon took a couple steps forward, stepping around Anna's figure, and was surprised at how quickly he woke up. In his opinion, he was different in some ways. Moreover, the monster found it interesting. It stood in front of the protagonist, whose attention was incidentally drawn to the creature's legs. The next moment, something came close to Anna's face, making him nervous. Due to the intense pressure from the demon's blow, the log to which the character was tied broke with a crack. Its quick movements provoked a small stream of air to appear. The monster brought its muzzle close to the boy's face and spoke aloud, which for some unknown reason reeked of their power. The demon grabbed Anna by the lower part of his face, slightly injuring him. He didn't understand how a human could be stronger than him. The protagonist looked at him with a menacing facial expression and asked what the monster was talking about. There was blood running down the guy's forehead, but there was no fear in his eyes. He raised his gaze, which reflected some kind of spark, and after a short period of time, a red core glowed on the main character's chest. It pulsed and pressed on the situation. A rare movement cut off the paths that prevented him from moving, and the monster even flew back slightly. On managed to free himself. He grouped himself together and landed on both feet, pinning his head down. A red aura emanated from him. The character abruptly grabbed the sharp object with his right hand and addressed it by the body, making a swinging motion. A second later, the new cold weapon whizzed by the demon figure, leaving a red trail in space. However, the monsters managed to pull away, but Anna's reaction only made him angrier. The demon tensed his right clawed paw, which emanated a dark aura, and realized how agile his new opponent was. A monstrous black power mixed with red glowed in the space. The monster tried to strike the protagonist, but he in turn did a somersault and jumped over the creature, freezing it in mid-air. He bounced a few meters away and landed on both feet, keeping his balance with his left hand. This great distance allowed Anu to pause slightly, though the creature was already heading in his direction. The readers saw how difficult it was for the boy. There were drops of blood running down his face. He tensed his eyebrows, but his expression seemed slightly tired. The protagonist thought, clenching his jaws, that in his previous life, he would have been able to cut off the monster's head before it could react. Except that his job was to save the three who were now unconscious. The man assumed a pose from which he instantly began to pick up speed, and rushed towards the creature, whose dark silhouette was surrounded by red magic. It slowly moved towards the guy, as if waiting for him to be the first to act. The protagonist swept to himself that it was a demon with a red core. The opponent was agile, flexible, and had great reaction and attack speed. Readers could notice how analyzing threads appeared around the monster's figure, which informed the guy. At the same time, the creature's joints were not protected by a strong shell. That was its weak point. However, this moment made Anu realize that he shouldn't have done that. He threw his hand in an attempt to wound him. Though, as it might have seemed, the monster's clawed paw was reaching for the red demon core on the character's chest. The guy flashed his yellow eyes and pulled back slightly to his right side, revealing his left shoulder where the monster had struck.